So welcome everybody to this latest video on 162 Maths, and in this video we'll be going over the AQA GCSE Maths 2022 Advanced Information regarding the Higher Paper 2 Algebra section. We'll be looking in depth of what topics are written on the information sheet and also what you need to revise in each of the topics. Now, as always, there's going to be links to lessons covering each of the topics, as well as a link at the end of the video to some practice exam questions that you may want to have a attempt at to prepare you for this exam. So looking at this list of algebraic topics that are going to be featuring on the paper 2 of the higher syllabus, it's fair to say that a few of these topics are going to be merged into one question. Now, there are a few topics that will probably most likely be individual, and in terms of higher level questions, I think you're probably looking at inverse functions and completing the square, which tend to be classed as higher level topics. The rest, I would say, will be scattered around the paper, and again, you could find easy options or easy questions related to each of these topics or more complicated ones. So it's really important that you do vary your revision, not just on one type of particular question, but just seeing what types of easy questions could I get, what are the most likely questions to come up, and what are the more extension questions to have a look at. Now, before we take a deeper dive into what is in each of these topics, just a little reminder, if there's some of these topics that have absolutely no idea what you're doing, then just simply click on the lesson links in the description below, which should guide you through each of these topics comprehensively. So looking at the equation of a circle, some of the key points you need to make sure that you know and revise is know that the equation of a circle is x squared plus y squared equals r squared to and from a graph. Now, more often than not, if your teacher's pushed you and you've looked at the equation of a circle that's not in the center, I don't think that's going to be applicable. So try and focus your revision on ones where the center is at the origin. You also need to know how to find the equation from a diagram, but also know how to plot an equation from an equation if that's given. Another key question that I've seen come up is to know how to find if a coordinate lies on a circle. Now, how do you do that? Well, to check, all you need to do is simply sub the x and y coordinates into the coordinate, or into the equation rather, and see if it equals r squared. And if it does equal r squared, then it does lie on the line. If it doesn't equal to r squared, then the coordinate does not lie on the circumference. You also need to know how to find where it crosses the x and y ordinate. And again, this is either from a diagram, which would be worth like 1 or 2 marks, if that. And also it's going to be worth more marks if they don't give you a diagram and you still need to work that out. Now, how to find where it crosses the x and the y axis, or in other words, the x-intercept or the y-intercept, or to find the x-intercepts, all you do is make y equal to 0 and solve for x. And to find the y-intercept, all you need to do is do the opposite, which is make x equal 0 and solve for y. And that'll tell you where the circle, if it does, intercept the x or y axis. And the other thing you need to know is whether a point lies inside a circle or outside a circle. Now, for this, all you need to do is compare the distance. And I don't think this will come up because I think they would have made it a little bit more specific on the revision list, but compare the distance of the center to the point and the radius of the circle. Now, if the distance between, so if you imagine you've got a circle here and we've got a point there, well, if I measured that distance from the center and I compared that to the radius, well, if the point lies outside the circle, it's going to be larger than the radius. And if a point lies inside a circle, then it's going to be shorter than the radius. And the reason why that works is because for both tests, you're actually using the center coordinate. So that's why that particular thing works. Moving on to linear equations. So again, just have some common knowledge of how to solve single-sided, which again will be literally worth 1 mark. Double-sided, ones with fractions, ones with negative x's. Just make sure you're fully up to grips with your skills of solving linear equations. They may be used in more than one other topic. So for example, linear equations may get involved in multiplying brackets, equations to percentages, etc., which all feature in different topics. Now, key thing to remember is that with it being a calculator paper, you may be tempted where your answer is going to be not an integer. So if possible, try and leave your answer as a fraction if it's a recurring decimal, or you really can't bother to round, which you don't really want to do in this particular topic. So just leave your answers as a fraction. Do you need to simplify them? I would say yes, with it being on a calculator paper, but if it's an improper fraction, do you have to write it as a mixed number? Probably not. So just make sure that you leave your answer as a fraction if your answer is a nasty number. And a good way to check if you've got time at the end is just substitute that value back into the original question to see if it does give you whatever it equals to. The next thing we move on to is quadratics. Now, again, looking at the algebra sheet section, I should say, there is a lot of quadratics involvement in there. So a lot of these are going to be involved in other areas. So looking at quadratics and factorizing the quadratics, remember that you need to be able to know how to factorize when you've got single x squared, how to factorize when you've got a multiple coefficient of x squared, so when you've got like 2x squared or 3x squared or 4x squared. And if you do get that, that will probably appear later on in the paper. You also need to look at difference of two squares and completing the square again, which again is mentioned later on. You also need to be able to know how to solve, and again, I don't think this will probably come up, but again, it's used in other topics that's mentioned in the paper. So again, as well as knowing factorizing, just be prepared to know how to solve it using those methods. And also, this may be a stretch and just thinking outside the box. They may give you a diagram of a parabola that's been plotted, and you then need to work out the equation. So just be mindful of doing that, particularly as completing the square is on there and turning points, etc. You may get asked to plot a quadratic as well. Moving on to the next one, number line inequality. This should be absolute bread and butter for you. So this should be relatively easy. The key thing you need to remember here is if you've got a less or more than, then that's going to be an unshaded circle. And if you've got less or equal to or a greater or equal to, then that is a shaded one. So if I wanted to represent 3x and let's say 5 and equal to, again, all I need to do is just do 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's just stick a 2 there. So I'm going to put a circle at 3, a circle at 5. I'm going to colour the one in 5 and join the points up. Now remember that whenever you are representing inequality on a number line, always make sure, and again, it's probably just stating the obvious, that you've got a single x in the middle. Moving on to completing the square. So again, the key things you need to remember here is know how to factorize a quadratic expression into the form of ax plus a squared plus b, where a and b could be negative numbers in there as well. You also need to know how to solve using completing the square. Also know that minus a and b is the turning point, which again is another topic that's mentioned in this list. B is the minimum value that the expression can take when x equals a, and that a is whatever number is inside the bracket. Again, remember that it could be a plus or a minus, so even though it's a plus on the screen, it could also be a minus as well. And also, if you're asked, and again, I don't think this will be on there because there's no mention of symmetry on the revision list, but just remember that the formula of or the equation, shall I say, x equals a is the line of symmetry of that parabola. So for example, here, I just do a parabola here. This point here is minus a b. And so if I had to measure what the line of symmetry is going to be, so let's say just pick two numbers. Let's go for 3 and minus 5. So this equation of the line of symmetry will be x equals 3. Looking at coordinate problems, so again, this could be absolutely anything. And again, if you're not too sure, there's a video that goes over quite a lot of exam questions relating to coordinate problems. So again, the typical things you need to know is finding intersects, which is exactly done the same way as we've done with quadratics, finding midpoints, finding points that make certain shapes. So one thing I've noticed going through a series of past papers is the types of questions where you've got 3 points plotted and it says point D makes the shape into a trapezium or a right angled trapezium or a parallelogram. What's the coordinate? So just be mindful of that. And another thing that may come up is links to ratio on a line. So for example, you may have 2 points, let's just call that A and B. And it may say that C is 2/3 of the distance of AB. So then therefore you'd work out the distance, divide it by 3, times it by 2, and then work with the coordinates. Or what you would do, a much easier way of doing it, is to look at the x ordinates, the difference between the x ordinates, and then multiply it by 2/3, and that'll tell you how far away it is from A both vertically and horizontally. So moving on to perpendicular lines. So again, key things you want to remember is know how to recognize when lines are perpendicular. Now, perpendicular means that two lines meet at a 90-degree angle. You also need to understand perpendicular gradient. So if a line has got a gradient of 3, then a perpendicular line is going to have a negative reciprocal. So you just do minus, change the sign and make it 1 over. Remember, if you've got fractions, flip the fraction, change the sign. You also need to know how to write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to another. So again, it could be multiple choice where they give you an equation of a line and it says that another line is perpendicular. What's its gradient? So you just need to select whichever option gives you the negative gradient, well, the actual perpendicular gradient rather. You also need to know how to draw a line that is perpendicular. Again, that's going to be involving loci, a bit of compass work or a protractor, but I think that's a very loose thing to say, but having knowledge of that will at least put you in good stead going forward. Moving on to turning point. This is also known as the minimum or maximum point of a parabola or a curve. And you also need to be familiar with knowing how to use completing the square, which is another topic mentioned, to find the turning point without plotting. And again, that could come up. So try and avoid plotting a set of axes when it doesn't tell you, or if you haven't got some graph paper that's instilled on the paper. I would make sure you revise completing the square, because I think that will be a grade 8 topic or a question that's going to be worth several marks in this paper, as it's mentioned on this list. The next one is inverse functions. Now again, every inverse function question I've seen on a high GCSE paper tends to be at the latter, and it does tend to be worth about 3 marks. So totally understand the steps of how you find the inverse function, but also not only do you need to know how to find the inverse function when you're given f of x, but also know how to work backwards. Remember, there's always going to be one question that's never been done before, and I think that's something that's not really been tested with GCSE. It's all good and well them asking you how to find the inverse function, but then you want to go to the opposite direction of giving the inverse function and trying to find the original one. And again, if you're not sure how to do that, then just click on the link in the description below for functions and I'll talk you through it. And the last one is triangle numbers. Now, although it's good common knowledge for you to know what a triangle number is, again, you don't need to know what they are, but you do know how to generate them. And basically with triangle numbers, the difference starts with 1 and then the difference increases by 1 afterwards. Now again, to look at this, I always say to students, try and think about pool or snooker and you're trying to make a triangle. And so here, your first triangle number is 1. Then you're looking at 3. Then looking at 6. And then you're looking at 4. And then 3, 2, 1. So that's going to be 10. And then, and so forth. Now remember, you have got a calculator. So you can kind of use it, but as long as you know how to generate those triangle numbers. So here we've got a difference of 2, then we've got a difference of 3, then we've got a difference of 4, then we've got a difference of 5. Now again, triangle numbers, again, I would say on a limb, if I had to put money on this, I would say it's going to be a multiple choice question. It'll only be worth 1 mark. It may be a case of having a question of which of these 5 numbers is a triangle number or which one isn't a triangle number. So always make sure you read the question carefully and don't just jump in with those multiple choice questions thinking that you know what the answer is without reading it properly. And now if you're wanting to practice all of these algebra topics for paper 2, then there should be a link that's appearing on your screen that if you click on should take you to the video, which has got both the question paper and also goes through the answers that will help you with your revision.